question. From that context, the toe in the water context, let's then look at the ministers who are involved in that ministry. And must ministers live in the community in which they minister?
Yes, but I don't. And obviously, if I don't believe you need to. There are issues about moving into neighborhoods. One of them is stealing housing from the poor. And it's one of the ones staff at Yonge Street Mission had to look at. I think living close to community is very important, and I actually do live close to the community we live in. We have staff, Matthew, among others, have lived in our neighborhood, and there's no question there are benefits. It's necessary to know, but if you're not in, you better figure out how to come in emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
I think Vancouver is different from most other Canadian cities I've learned about in that poverty is fairly evenly dispersed across a large swath, easily 55–60% of the city, with high concentrations only in the downtown east side and the immediate neighborhoods around it. So that the issue of moving in and thereby displacing others is not so much a problem for us. And because Vancouver, again, more than most cities that I've come to know, is very neighborhood bound. It's a city that really has embraced for 40 years or more the wall-to-wall neighborhood concept. If you're not in the neighborhood, you're not perceived to be of the neighborhood. And so I would say it would be pretty critical in our context.
Yes. It's a complicated answer. I agree with yes, but our first church, the parsonage, was attached to the church building. That's not good. Our second church, which was a church plant, the parsonage, was the church house, the church office, and everything else. And that directly contributed to our burnout and leave of absence from the ministry. The third place we lived, which was in St. Louis, we bought a house about a mile from the church. And during the time we lived there, the bottom dropped out of the market. And it took us 4 years to pay for the house after we sold it. That's part of ministry. Where we live now, we live in a condo right around the corner from the church, and our balcony looks out on the church parking lot, which sometimes is too much. But I am a strong advocate of living at least close enough to the church so you relate with the community and what Jonathan just said, that you identify. I really have issues with pastors who live 10 miles from the church. I don't understand how they can really be emotionally invested in what's going on there.
If we can pass it down to Jonathan, we'll let Jonathan begin with the next question. Continuing to think about the ministers, could you please identify a principle by which you define healthy boundaries for incarnational living? And then give us an example of one of your healthy ministry boundaries.
Oh boy, this is where we become transparent, eh? Again, because I came into mission work from a biblical studies and a literature background, I always see things first theologically and then I try to work it out. So the very first commandment or sort of context for work that I find in the Bible is the last words of Genesis 1, the first go-round of describing the creation of the world. And Sabbath was the crowning act. And Sabbath then becomes not only the ground of biblical ethics, but the ground of spirituality. These two things come together in resting in God's power and God's providence and presence. So I would say that living principle that defines everything else. I'm not so good at practicing it. when I have tried, I've thought Sabbath means sabbatical, which means I stop what I'm doing and I go far away and do something entirely different. Preferably sleep for a long time. What I found is it takes, and this would be true of colleagues, it takes about 5 to 7 days to let all that stuff leach out of my system. So Sabbath has to be a daily practice so that I don't have to wait a week to start hearing the flesh from God.
One of the principles that I have learned through difficult experience is protecting personal time, both personal yourself and family time as well. How I got into real trouble in my marriage was subordinating my wife and my family to the ministry, so that it set her up to be jealous of the ministry. As a matter of fact, she called the ministry, she wouldn't call it ministry anymore, she'd call it my work, and she said I was a workaholic, and she felt like the ministry, the work was the other woman in my life. And so it precipitated a real sense of crisis. And that's because I did not, in my first 15 years of ministry, I did not make her and my family a priority. They were always the negotiable item in my schedule, and every other person's need took precedent over that. Through some very difficult times, I finally got that straight in my mind, that protecting personal time, honoring commitments. If I say I'm going to be home at 5 o'clock for dinner, I need to be there at the time I say. And protecting family time from intrusions, from phone calls, from people at the door, and taking plenty of time out of the neighborhood to relax in other settings, restorative settings.
Well, I could probably just say ditto to what Bob has just said, because I've been down that same road. At one point in a real crisis in our marriage and ministry, a friend who was another pastor but knew me well said, "You know, Howard, it appears to me that you're married to the church and you made your wife your mistress." And that was pretty strong language, but it pretty well pictured, the way things were in it. It has been a lifelong struggle to still maintain healthy boundaries. I think personally, one of the things that in the last few years I've begun doing, and my wife very generously grants me the freedom to take a week by myself at a cottage for a week of personal, spiritual reflection and fishing. And I'm not sure which is the most spiritually beneficial.
My grandfather worked 80 hours a week. My father worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's ingrained in us as men to work long and hard, and we get our communal and family strokes for working long, hard, and being successful. And we pay high prices for it, and our families pay high prices for it, which is just what everybody else has said. And probably, if we were more honest, we would probably say, and I'm guessing on the other guys, that we haven't taken the money and run, and we haven't picked up a mistress along the way other than the church. But apart from that, we've probably done just about everything, and pushed ourselves to the edge of burnout probably many times over. My wife laughs every time anybody asks me to describe healthy anything. That's for her the joke of the year. And conversely, my wife and I date every week, and have done it for 37 years. Conversely, I go away at least 4, if not 6 times a year for spiritual formation retreats. But the word I actually want to add is this. We've kind of talked about Sabbath in various different ways. The word I want to add is safety or shalom. We need to work safely in that we need to work safe for us. And that will be very different. Some of us will work 60 hours a week quite comfortably, and some of us will find 40 a strain. But we need to work safe for our families. And we need to be safe for the people we serve. We need to be hugely safe for the people we serve.
Okay. Apparently in discussions to date, I believe you, Bob, made reference to risks having to be taken or having to be allowed to be taken if you're in a leadership position. I'd like each of you to describe one risk that you have taken or allowed to be taken in your ministry.